Hello and welcome back to another episode of the EMS Handoff podcast. We are live at day 3 of the Tennessee Emergency Medical Services Association Conference in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Today, the conference attendees are getting, there's 2 tracks going on today. They got pediatric hours or critical care, looking for those continuing education hours for some of those providers here. But we're going to go into the realm of data management with Mr. C.J. Lance. He said this was the most riveting presentation or the most riveting podcast. That's what you were saying beforehand, right? Data management is like,
I don't know if I'm cold in here or if I'm just shaking from excitement.
Well, it's one of those things. I've been warm the whole time. Everybody keeps talking about this whole coldness, and I'm not. They even put a post up about how Arctic it was in the main hall on day 1, but I've been like sweating the whole time. So.
Oh man, my wife told me to pack a jacket, and I said,
"Don't need that.
It's July in Tennessee." And then I called her the first day, and she's like, "How is it?" I'm like,
I needed the jacket.
That jacket you talked about. That's you win. You win this round.
You always pack for what you might need, but in East Tennessee, well, we've had rain, sun, but inside we've had the Arctic.
Yes.
Because I think next week they may be doing an inside snow tube run. So
count me in.
We're way off Bradley Dean from the topic of data management, but. You never really know. So, CJ, tell us who you are, where you're from, where you got to here, and you enjoyed the paparazzi yet too.
I'm telling you, just showed up, sat down, and I thought my wife was the only person who thought I was important until they started taking pictures. Yeah, so my name is CJ Lance. I born and raised in Central Texas. Worked EMS in the Central and East Texas area for about 13 years. Last November, I left the fire department right outside of Northwest Houston and chose to come to ESO. Ironically, I did their pre-hospital care research forum, so I actually had to step out of the forum to do one of my interviews to get this job. And my now boss was like, "Where are you at?" And I said, "I'm actually at your headquarters." And she's like, "Well, wait, why are you there?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing research with, the famous Remley Crow."
Remley Crow.
And I said, "I'm doing research, and so now I've got to go back in there and complete that."
So can I get a job at the building that I'm already in? Is that what
I'm already here. Can I just get a cubicle?
Yeah, just give me a cubicle. I'm good to go.
Here?
Like computer, we're good to go. But you've made your way to East Tennessee.
Yes.
You're halfway through your jaunt here. We're going to be done after today, but you're still here for a little while longer.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I came out to Louisville, and then I'm hanging out with the EMS educators, which has been a blast of a group to hang out with, especially after hours. and then
this no longer is going live.
And then
social. Yeah,
that's perfect. The honesty, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm hanging out with the Tennessee Fire Chiefs, who's an equally wonderful group of folks to hang out with on Sunday and Monday, and so I'm pretty excited.
They must have paid you well. So.
They paid me okay. I think my wife might have paid them for me to get out of the house.
That's could be what it is. All right, so. We're talking data management. So
yes.
Let you kick it off. What are we talking about here, and why does it even matter?
Data management. So, 13 years in the field, and I spent, part of that in the field, part of that administration. And I recognized a little bit of the importance when I became a supervisor and started really QAQIing charts and trying to see where some of my employees were excelling. So I could tell those guys, hey, keep up the good work. And where, there was some room for improvement for some of those guys. And as I was reviewing the charts and looking at the data for those guys and gals, I noticed there were specific ones, and I was like, wait a minute, you haven't started an IV in like 3 months. And I would go through and start looking and digging around, and I'd have to look in the actual free text field and search through that to pull the information out. And so I started realizing a little bit there. As I got more into heavy clinical stuff and started flying, we did a lot of research. We looked at a lot of it. We were really updating our protocols. I was surrounded by some exceptionally intelligent individuals. My first flight partner was he was a nurse prac for like 14 years and always reading the most up-to-date research. And so I started looking at that, looking at data management. And as we kept going, I realized how important it is to make clinical and operational decisions based on that data. Not just, hey, that article looks good, we can do it. But, well, that article looks good, but will that fit our needs based on, are we rural, are we, a metro, are we an inner city department? Where are we transporting? What's our patient population? And so as I went to the fire department that I was at out in Northwest Houston, Cypher Fire Department, shout out to those guys. My assistant chief there was a big data, call them data ninjas now, I think, not data nerds, I think is becoming the appropriate term, but his name's Chief Justin Reed, brilliant individual. And he was always looking at data and pushing for us to look at data and trying to show us how to extract data, use pivot tables. And it made the world so much easier to actually say, when we went to our commissioners, hey, we need to do this operationally, or a medical director, we need to do this clinically. And, well, why? Well, let me show you why. Here's the actual data. And some of that was easy, and some of it was a little more difficult, depending on what our providers really put into our EPCR systems.
Well, I think that last statement right there is where I really want to start this focus is, for the individual that is on the road, your road crews or air crews, wherever they are, but your primary provider, your EMTs, advanced EMTs, and paramedics. Why does data management matter? And I think that line is that last little statement there is what that is. It's your commentary.
100%
is going to influence every bit of your operation.
Yep.
Your local service, the county that you serve, your protocols, your reimbursements, the profession as a whole, because this data gets aggregated at the next level, gets aggravated, gets aggravated too, depending on how bad,
depending on who,
at the federal level, and decisions are made on that.
Yep.
You're going to walk in, and I don't know how many times I've walked in. I'd love to have a piece of paper here, on advisory committees or whatnot, and somebody comes like, I want you to do this. Why? And he give me a little comment. It's like one sheet. I said, you're wanting me to walk in to the chief's office and tell him you need a $1.2 million allocation.
Yep.
On your one paragraph. Ain't going to happen.
100%.
Like, the more we have. Why? Why does that matter? How many calls? You're talking about fires on the interstate. How many do we have? I don't know. Okay, go into the data. So, am I wrong?
No, you're 100% correct. I watched that as I started attending more and more of our commissioner meetings at my last employer, and it was, you broke it down that there's so many levels. There's your local level, there's more state, and there's a national level, and then we can even branch that out into international medicine. Right. But at the local level, when you're talking about, let's talk about your specific department. You go in and you try to get more resources. Hey, we need another ambulance. We need to open a station in this area. You've got to be able to pull out data. You can't walk to a commissioner's board, especially some that are a bit more strict, and say, hey, I think we need a third ambulance in this county. Well, why? Well, we're running a lot of calls. What is a lot? How often are your ladies and gentlemen on the road? What calls are they running? How long? When do they leave the station? When do they get back to the station?
Right. Your unit utilization time.
Your UHUs.
Yep.
So being able to pull that, and then getting into when you're talking about clinical stuff, I know we talked heavily with our medical director. He was very pro, let's go with supraglottic airways. And we had to sit back and look and sift through a lot of our data on what's our first pass attempt, second pass attempt. Okay, whenever we administer sedation, was this patient hypoxic before, afterwards? What was let's try to get to root causes of these different patients. That is easy when it comes to 50 charts. It's more difficult when you're running 1,000 calls and you have one person sitting there trying to sift through 1,000 calls and look at free text boxes and try to break those things down, and then expand that to these departments that are running 15, 30, 60,000 calls. And you're trying to pull all that information. You could do that in 10 minutes, running a report if these folks are, inputting the information properly using drop-down boxes in the flow chart, etc. Or it could take 5 weeks. I mean, it just depends on how good the information is put in there.
So, talking about that data, and from your position now, or even where you were, on the administrative side beforehand, when it comes to documentation, what is the biggest thing that you see that causes you problems at maybe the administrative level or as a collection moving forward? What is missing at that provider level that would, I guess, maybe top three to say, if you would do this would help so many more individuals and the profession overall?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, number one, now that I've actually sat down with some of our folks and done research, if they input the information in a way that we can pull it out, and again, pull it out in the mass quantities if we used a systematic, I think we were talking earlier that there were, I think, 9 different ways that folks documented normal saline.
No. When we pulled just the narratives and started looking through, trying to figure out different things, there were 35 different ways.
Oh God, I was way
everything
off.
From NaCl to normal saline to
0.9%,
NS,
yeah.
0.9%, big N, little s.
Yeah.
They would misspell it, nomosaline. I mean, it was all different. I mean, 35 different ways it was documented. And like, I can't remember how many records. I want to say, but it was a huge number of records. So, I mean, when you look at that, there is no way to code or query things so you can pull it from a narrative. So various vendors out there have drop-down menus, and that data management, if you put that data in there, and then you can use an explanation over here, but if you document and use the drop-down menus for vital signs, interventions, assessment, that allows that data to be pulled, used for research to improve clinical care, used for research for operational things, which, when we recap, I'll talk about the 5 functions of documentation and why it's important. But I think we do a disservice in the initial education piece by teaching people, well, we want to document by the chart method. We want to document using the SOAP method. We want to we've moved to electronic. Why do we not use an electronic simulator in initial education? Oh, wait a minute. We've got that for clinical stuff, but nobody uses it right. Anyway.
Wrong. So I want to real quickly. I'm going to have this conversation with Bradley. So I have this conversation with my son all the time. That you can't say all or most unless you have data. Because one of the things when I say, because the reason why when you say we don't use it correctly, there are some that do, and allow them to use it. Now, I think there's some things that we need to. So all 3 of us are providers. I want us to use our right hand to elevate if we're 100% our IV administration or insertion.
Are you pulling my numbers? Or you're asking me.
I'm asking you to raise your hand if you're 100% on your. But if we look at a lot of these, they're like, "Hey, I started an IV."
Yep.
We need to document every unsuccessful attempt as well.
Exactly. So we're talking data. So we need to get. So if you miss one, is that a bad thing to miss an IV?
No.
Let me ask you this: if we lined up 10 physicians. You think any of them will say I was 100% on all my IV attempts? Absolutely not. So, there's nothing wrong with not documenting that. In fact, there's actually something wrong with not documenting it because you actually, almost to the nature of falsifying care because you said you didn't do this. Well, that missed attempt could actually cause you a problem. So you need to. How many vital signs do you have? Not just the one that you transfer that patient off with. You have the one with the patient in the ambulance every X number of minutes that you did, and the handoff of the that you should have multiple data sets, which makes our data more reliable.
Yeah, and even to that point, one of the you mentioned the top 3 things. One thing that I don't know if I put my top 3, but this was really pushed by one of my mentors, Chief Reed, was when you go in the field. If I walk up to you and you say, "Don't touch me," I say, "All right, how are you doing today?" And we have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I can enter a little bit of an assessment on you. I can put some information. So I may not have gathered a ton of information on you, but I can pretty good and well tell what your APU is. I can if you have a GCS of 15, I can probably tell pretty quick. If I see you walking around, what was your gait, and so you can tell a lot of stuff, and it's stuff that we just don't put in these. To pulling the data out, when it came to some of the more sensitive topics, let's say ketamine. Can we say the ketamine word on?
We can say ketamine. We talked about ketamine in one of our other podcasts.
Oh, great. So, I saw what Brimley Crow pulled out when she went to pull some of that ketamine data out. And to your point, when she went to try and pull that information out of the ESO data set, pulling that out between flowchart and narrative. And I watched her write code when I sat there and did our research, the pre-hospital care research forum. The amount of lines of code that she had to write and the amount of conversations we had to talk about with the free text narrative and, hey, was this documented, was this not documented? It took up so much more time than click, done.
So we have to, so this is a direct point to those providers. There's a reason that both of those are there.
100%.
And the one purpose that it is not is to make their job harder.
Agreed.
I think we can say that by adding that data in those areas properly, it actually is designed to make their job easier. Because again, we're going to utilize this maybe we can utilize this data to get you another truck on the road, or move a truck to if you have a 10% utilization over here, it may be that we need to move that, and so you actually create a better system for everybody.
100%.
Or better protocols, or better, patient outcomes, and a healthier population ultimately leads to less calls to the 911 system. So there's so many things. So no, we're not advocating data just for the fact of you get people like Brimley Crow, which again, good friends. So we're not just so she has a job to do some research. No. We're doing it to find ways to make the profession better.
100%. Well, and it came when it came into Colorado, when there was the big case that came out. There was somebody who testified, and you have to have data to testify on that, and to extrapolate all that, pull all that data out, extract it, not extrapolate from EPCRs or from large RMSs. I mean, that's a lot of work, especially again if you're looking at the free text and you can't just click a few buttons and make a nice table and pull it from the database on your flowcharts. I get it. Again, 13 years in the field. My documentation at 3 a.m. was not nearly as good as my documentation at 3 p.m.
You were looking to go back to bed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So certainly there were things missed, especially when you get into those deep calls. When you go out and take somebody's airway, and we call it RSI or pharmaceuticals or whatever you call it. When you're using that many medications, you're documenting that many things, or you're working a cardiac arrest. That's a lot of things to document. And I get that it does get tedious, but it does also allow for us, again, to be able to improve our clinical performance. When we talk about, I was talking with the chief just yesterday about hour utilization, and hey, there's got to be an easy way to pull this information so I can take it to my commissioners because I think we need another truck. Or somebody else said at the last conference I was at, they're trying to cut my budget, and they're trying to cut it to the point that I need to remove one of my 5 units. So I need to go in with documentation to tell them why they can't cut my budget by $1.5 million. And that stuff, I mean, that's important because that is FTEs, that's full-time employees' jobs. If they cut that, you're now having to go fire 6-8 people.
Right.
So that stuff is so vitally important. And you now have somebody who's waiting 30 minutes on an ambulance when it used to be 15 minutes because we had that extra ambulance.
Right. And I would talk about, the agency where I work full-time. And, the big thing there right now is, what can we do to continue to improve patient care? So, a thing came up and somebody said, hey, we need to start carrying blood. We've got other agencies in the area that are carrying blood. And they, and I said, I want to see their data. And they said, well, we can carry blood and we can show that. And I was like, stop. We need to pull the data now. For the patients we've had previously.
Right.
So what trauma patients have we had that didn't improve with 500 cc's of fluid? If their vital signs didn't improve, they would have probably benefited by blood. Then, let's see if we can find the outcomes for, which is difficult sometimes to find out unless you're tied back in. So we'll talk about, outcome data a little bit later or another podcast. But did they improve after the administration of blood by the flight service? Did they improve after, after administration of blood once they got to the hospital? Because, that's what we need to look at. And then what's the feasibility? What's the cost? What's the number needed to treat? But then we got to, all of it depends on data.
100%.
Well, and the thing is, a lot of times, and it's not just our profession. Obviously, we're talking EMS here, so we're going to specifically mention that. But everybody's like, hey, this, XYZ service is carrying blood, or they've added RSI, or they've added a new technique or a new piece of equipment. The first thing is like, we're better than they are, so we should be doing this. Why? Is it because we want to be a better service than the other person, or do we want a better outcome for our patients? And so, why did you do that? Well, okay, so they, in Tennessee, we have one service specifically that is on the ground that's carrying blood products. They're operated out of a hospital. So they're able to restock their blood supply, or at least refresh their blood supply to make sure that, we've got a critical need of blood out there and not wasting blood. So now I moved to a rural service. Do I have the same outcomes? Well, they may need it more, Possibly. Do they have the same number of car wrecks or the same number of trauma incidents that will lead to that? And okay, we do that. How do we do this with keeping the blood supply? So those products. So we can take their data. What are they doing? What are we doing that's similar? And can we replicate that here? Yeah, it takes a little bit longer.
No, I completely agree. Again, I live in Texas, Northwest Houston area, and the department that I was at, we got blood. But our time from scene to a trauma facility to get blood to these guys and to get them to the appropriate trauma facility, level 2 or higher, a lot of these, it was worth us getting blood. There is another department that is a couple agencies over, and they didn't get blood. They chose not to. They looked at all their data. They used the proper data, and they said, hey, we have less than 10-minute or so trip. I don't want to say what they actually said. We have less than X amount of time before we can get to a level 2 trauma facility, which will treat X% of our patients. There's no need for us to have blood. We are going to waste potentially a precious commodity and spend a lot of our taxpayer money for something that's not going to do a lot of good. And so I think it is. I think you have to look at your data. Where are you at? Where's the closest facility? Where can you team up with a blood bank so you can recycle this stuff? And so I think there's a lot of points to look at that, not just, they're doing the cool thing. I'm going to do.
Right. And that your point is that's why I said, I want to see data, because, I hear people say, well, we need to hear it. But are they truly better? They just added something without the data, and now we're looking at data and we're saving the cost for something else. Prime example was, several years ago, people were like, why do you want to push antibiotics? Well, we did the data. We had lots of patients with open fractures that would have benefited because the infection rate and everything else. It's not that expensive. The number needed to treat was 1. So it became a no-brainer. So now we're looking at, what about that for your second patients? So if you get the antibiotic on board 25 minutes sooner than, what we're finding is, 25 minutes sooner than what they're getting in the hospital, the outcomes improve. Well, the number needed to treat for that is somewhere around, 20. Do you encounter 20 or more septic patients when you've got a population, transport population that you're transporting of about 25,000? Sure, I would imagine.
Well, so and I'll even go so far, because since you're mentioning hospital stuff, the hospitals now have realized the importance of data prior to their front door, and they are doing research to include you as well to say, okay, because before it was admit to balloon time, then it went door to balloon time. Now they're talking about first insult to balloon time, and first insult to first provider to door to and they're breaking that down, and that way they can partner back with you guys to say, hey, you're taking 25 minutes on the scene for this patient within these parameters that we're doing this with. I need you to do this and this and move on. One of the things that we've got in our area is at our level 1 trauma center is their stroke care that they have. They pushed a lot of stuff on stroke care. If you're coming in with very certain parameters, like you are getting immediate assessment, going straight to the cath lab or CT, but now they're trying to go back to providers going, hey, because of the way our protocol is going and where we're trying to push stuff so fast, if you come in with an IV that is less than a certain gauge and basically below the mid forearm or down, they've got to stop, reinsert in the AC or go to the central line. So document via your radio port where your IV is, what size it is, if you can move to an AC before you arrive. So that way they can advance. Hey, they've got a CT identified, they're pushing meds immediately. Obviously, if that's the right course. So they're pushing out to us to enhance their care. Why are we not pushing that out to us to enhance our care?
Right. And and we've seen a big uptick in EMS research in the last 5 years. We could probably push that up to 10 years. And all of the data, let's talk about red lights and sirens and all these other things that we are now doing and we're finding in EMS. Yeah, we're not going to go there. I was going to ask.
Are you really taking away our lights and sirens?
I have nothing to do with this. I was going to say earlier, define better, but I felt like that might be the link of this podcast. But it's in order to do that research, in order for us to continue to improve the EMS profession, and I do believe that emergency medicine is a profession. But if we want to continue to hold ourselves to that professional standard, we have to be able to prove what we're doing works and what we're doing not works. Hey, how can we fix that? How can we make that better? And we have some exceptional physicians, some PhD folks that are doing some incredible research, but it comes back to you can't do research if you don't have the data.
Right. And valid data.
Valid data. You can have data, right? You have to have the valid data because ultimately, I mean, it's cool to do the cool stuff. It's cool to improve the profession. We're all here to save lives. And if you're doing something that's invalid data and making poor clinical decisions or operational decisions, you are potentially putting people's lives at stake. And that is terrifying from the standpoint of a husband and father.
Yes. I'll completely agree with that. So hey, if you miss an IV, you got 365 signs done. It takes an extra few seconds, maybe a couple of minutes. We've got documents we've got to write. We've all been there with 3-4 charts.
Oh yeah.
We're not the only ones. I've talked to plenty of physicians out there that are sitting 3-4 charts deep that they still need to take.
Oh yes.
Not granted, they just talk it and somebody else writes it down for them. But but yeah. So while you're representing a provider of that electronic resource, what's the important things to look for if an administrator is listening to this, or a provider that's saying, "Hey, we need to upgrade our stuff." So, what should we look for when looking for a new PCR system that focuses on that data that we can pull out and such? So,
yeah, there's a few things. One thing that I like to make sure that data is your data. Make sure that what you're putting in, you can easily get back out, and it's not difficult in the back end to pull it out. Because we all know if the more difficult the thing is, the less likely it is to happen. If I can click a few buttons and get something versus having to spend an hour to do it, I'm much more likely to do the first one, or much more likely to just keep procrastinating and push off the second one. Next is make sure that it is user-friendly. Make sure that your field staff are actually going to be able to click through, put this information in, put it in properly. Again, at 3 in the morning, not 3 in the afternoon. Right. And make sure that it's good. Make sure that you can go through and you can turn off the options that you're not using. A little less fatigue on them trying to scroll through and figure out exactly what they need. If I make sure it works for your system, make sure it has the things that your system needs as far as the medications or what kind of narrative you want, how you want your vitals input, that it's incorporated with your equipment, and make sure that it works for your system on a budgetary standpoint. And I think if you can fit all those things, I think it works. But we all know, we've all been there, and we've all been a little young in our day. If it sucks to write a chart on the chart, I'm 20 years good, it's easy. Right. And if I can't pull the data out on the administrative side, and if it's difficult or if I can't get it out in a usable format, what good is it that it was done right in the first place?
So I'm going to hit something that most people don't think about.
Hippie. Not really.
But not really. No, because it's nothing been there in his life. So they pull the data, and I would be in trouble. So see, it works.
I'll go ahead and call Steve.
Yeah, we got Steve on here. We got on retainer now.
Yeah, what is that retainer for me?
No, So a lot of people don't think about this, but we're in a realm where every hospital in the area, our academic institutions here, multiple of them have been hit. So one of the things we have to look for is a quality system. It's also looking for the cyber side.
100%. I'm glad you brought that up. We actually just got off the call, so I'll throw some numbers out there. We being ESO, they attempt to attack us. They being the cyber folks. On average of 303,000 times a month.
Wow.
350,000. We have just invested an extra $5 million into our cybersecurity. We have updated your SOC 2 compliant, and I'm not saying we're the only ones, but you have to make sure that information is secure. I was speaking with a fire chief or EMS chief the other day. He was at a conference with another gentleman logged into one of his systems, and they made it all the way back to the county government and actually got into their system, and he had to shut down the county government for a little bit because they weren't able to make it back there. We've had some folks try to attack us. Nobody's been successful except one, and one person that made it in. The way it was explained to me, I'm a paramedic. We put them in a maze, and they locked themselves into a closet, and we shut the door on them and trapped them. and we were able to do that extremely fast. And so I said, I have to make sure that those folks are up to snuff, and especially, we chat with a lot of hospitals, and they have some very tight security around that patient care information. As it should be.
Well, so you mentioned there, and I'll mention just last month I was able to be the host of a AMT webinar on cybersecurity readiness, and we had two individuals that were on there that had an issue that occurred, and one of them, the individual was actually at this conference right now. He was up with them late. He's like, some things are, the old kind of adage on anytime you're watching a movie in cyber, like, your computer starts to glitch, you just pop up, and he's like, it didn't happen like that, but I started noticing some odd things, characters and stuff like that in my email. And I called our comm center, like, yeah, we're having significant issues, like, unplug everything. And it went through, and they ended up pulling their MPTs offline. They had systems within the station for their UPCR, all their computers got pumped offline. They had their dispatch systems that would put their run report on the map, or not run report, their run details on the map up on a TV screen for them to, they had unplugged all of that, and they basically made phone calls. This is your call. They had to go back to paper tickets. Nobody knew where the paper tickets were. Because somebody clicked an email. But on the hospital side, one of our hospitals, nobody really thinks about what that affects. So a computer system gets infected. You can't use an X-ray machine. You can't reuse a CT scan. You can't do surgery because all of those systems are operated by computers. So I think one of the things that, and I love response, not necessarily the content, the fact that you all are bad. So anytime you're looking at a provider like ESO or one of the others, ask that question. What is your cyber posture?
Absolutely.
And if they're able to, they're like, thanks for the conversation. Have a great day.
You're down. Probably not appreciate that.
Right. And so, hey, I need to have my IT because I don't understand. Great. Let's talk to them. And then, they so, but if they have a blank face, leave.
Absolutely. And don't hesitate to say, hey, I know we're looking at this, and I'd like some IT. Right. Yep.
And they will. They will.
Hesitation.
So. All right.
So we hijacked the conversation.
But cybersecurity is a piece of this. But going back to the whole data integration. I don't care what vendor. Right. Make sure that data can be pulled on the other side. Make sure they've got a way reports that do all the other stuff. And if you've got questions on what you want to look at, one of the big things, and as I was looking at earlier, is using EMS data. So EMS.gov. For those of you that are out there, go there, look at your provider, look at your administrator, and look at some of the EMS agenda 2050, and some of the other stuff that's out there, and what they want to do with the data, and how it can drive your stuff, operation, how it can drive your care. Because there's five functions of documentation that I think is really important for people to think about. First of all, it's just physical for the record. Two is the legal thing. We've been talking about that with Steve. Yeah. So you've got to document. You've got to have that legal documentation. You've got to see but because everybody's out there, and everybody's got their cameras, everybody's got these phones, taking pictures and texting, doing all this other stuff. Here, information. And then operational. So that data can drive cues. Data can drive, clinically, data can drive, the size of it, how much we stock. We've got some great logistics people that are starting to look at that on our side. I don't want $2 million in inventory sitting in my logistics. Right. That's $10 million used on payroll. It won't be used on equipment upgrades. We just looked at the other day. Denison, for example. Denison is not cheap. It's not really expensive. Right. But Lumicon.
Yes.
How much do we administer? Do we need to have that much of a hand? Can we treat patients better, differently? Right. Going back to the we were having them sit expire for years, and now our people are like, we're only getting X number of times a year. We've got X number of trucks. We need to keep a couple in inventory. We need to project 10% over just in case. And right now, and if you're doing it right. All of them are scattered throughout the timeline, so I'm only buying every so often. A little bit. It's going to be purchased, nothing. Like it's and so there's so many things. Right. And that's what he's doing. Of course, we would only buy it in certain lot, certain time. But he's doing it. He's filtered it, and now there's expiration dates and stock, all that's computer data. It helps. We had a customer drop off recently, and they first 6 months saved $25,000 because they started this. Hey, what are we doing? What are we not? What are we going to aspire? And they were able to decrease the amount of stock on hand. We heard from somebody else speaking with recently, and they said in 1 year they gave away close to $1 million worth of medication. How much can you pay? Pay more. That's almost $1 million. And it's man, if you're tracking we have super savvy. I mean, especially the logistics folks that are coming to work, the EMS fire departments, they keep track of this stuff. You can save multiple FTE. That's the entire apparatus. If you are running a system with more than 5 agents and running $10,000 a year, you can't afford not to invest in some software management for your inventory. Because of data. So I'm gonna talk because I think Bradley on Wednesday night you were here and you asked a place to eat. What were you doing at the time? You were looking on your computer. You found them. Right? Yes. That's data. Yeah. If you went there and see how much it costs, that's what that was. So you were looking right, and they had all this stuff on there, and they didn't have the price on there. I probably would not have gone. But now it's kind of say value. Nobody would have got that's what you're doing. You're analyzing. If we're going to do something simple, if we're going to eat dinner one night, why would we not? Because you're looking at your investment, putting on food. Sometimes we've got some more money in the bank, buy some nicer food, but sometimes we don't. So you're analyzing all that, just like some decisions as far as what we're doing for dinner. Absolutely. And the firehouse every night, we're going to fix the food down. It's like where I was at headquarters, the whole thing was buy, you get out of the house, $5 for dinner all day, you got wine, and so that's and we're doing that. You jump on the road, hit waves, right? It's doing that for you. You bought into a system, now it's free. You get it paid. Your feature back. One of these free that are ads. Right. So that's another form of that. We're doing that. We're driving. Why would we not invest in that? Something that could, ramifications, as we mentioned, great. We eliminate $1 million in waste. $1 million. And seven figure. How much your truck's 15 years old? What's it cost on the road? Well, $1 million can replace that. Or we can take a dollar raise, usually, so it hits so many different. And we've actually started tracking some of our stuff. The cost for each unit, each month, for each hour. As far as your apparatus, so you can go back and say, hey, do we want to go gasoline or diesel? How much will this cost us over the next 5 years? Sorry for all those diesel. I don't understand. How much is this truck versus that truck? You can make some decisions. Again, cost they can make those decisions. There is another apparatus. There is a raise to retain your highly qualified, your highly skilled personnel.
And so there's so much good from that. It's willing to keep track, but it requires having some tangible that you can thumb through and look through. And speaking of data, there are some firms out there that are going to electric engines. So I want to see data of how they keep running, how is their time, because there may be the future of that. And there's cities far from being to electric. I say that because they're quiet. They run. I stepped out my truck. I stepped in my driveway. I heard this weird noise across the street. There was a 17-year-old kid pushing a battery powered. It was just the weirdest noise. And I had to go and it was all you heard was that's what grass actually sounds like. So we're looking at we pass our house. What are the ways our house? There's a lawnmower goes consistently. Yes. I got it. It's like I rode the house with the yard. And that yard is like manicured all freaking time. So I went ahead a couple years ago to the next company. We based on the a couple of probably shadows had one for about 7 years. He said he loves it. Yeah. And now my wife the fact that my son is now mowing using that money and stuff like that. Hey, no way. We're firing. All that money. I don't like. So as far as I was cost the advertisement of the yard, figured out how much somebody was pay, and I'm like, I'm still paying the guy. I'm not all into that company yet. So, but if you're to that point, you go look, and you can look at cash flow, revenue, et cetera. You're looking at data, and you're pulling data to figure out is this company going to fold in a year, 3 years, or is the viable option? And I was in a wireless energy company. So hey. You don't connected to in here with Wi-Fi. Yeah. It can charge over Wi-Fi. Yeah. Well, you just talking me something. Yeah. Conversation offline. Now, get into what kind of issues that cause later on. I don't know. That's all right. Yeah, definitely glad to have you here. You all take what they are offered. As he said, take what's good, fits your agency. If that works, go. If not, So and for those of you out there, I'm gonna go ahead and say, I'll tell Scott Bourne, Britt Meyer, Ridley Crow, and Tony Hernandez. We're gonna get you guys on your one. Yeah. It's been quite a while. That is part of it. They were so early. They were the early seven. So now we'll have to go. And really, what you're watching, don't worry, I'm going back on Bojangles, Cookout, so Bojangles and Cookout are here to see. Bojangles came, long time ago. And then they were bankrupt, they had to back up. And now they're back. So it's good. Now you really want something to go back past. It's just a little bit out of it. Got Powell's Burger. Powell's. You can ask my wife down Powell's Burger. If you go get their breakfast cheddar rhinos or the breakfast cheddar. It's like So cheddar house.
They started sitting here. They've got a few sources, maybe small. Very good burgers, cheddar rounds for some.
Anyway, we've got a way to get anyway, we're out here. So data management is key. If you're not trying to track data, you should be. It's for your patient, for your provider, for your service, county, and state, federal, all EMS agencies. And I don't want to call people's names, but I am sure every agency has a nerd law. Yes, absolutely. All right. Next time, everybody, your EMS Handoff.